Welcome to the Jones Gallery Lecture Series. I'm Sarah Jones, the curator at Jones Gallery. We're a contemporary art gallery in St. John, New Brunswick. Our core mandate is to present work by contemporary Canadian artists, but art education is also important to us, and we think that art history should be accessible, understandable, and free. That's why we hold public lectures at the gallery and produce videos like this one. To keep this series free and open, we rely on the donations of our viewers. Today's video is brought to you by Sarah and Matt. Thank you. If you would like to support our efforts in this, please donate at jonesgallery.ca/arthistory, and the link is below in the notes. Today we'll be talking about Caravaggio's Inspiration of Matthew. It's an altarpiece for the Contarelli Chapel in the Church of San Luigi de Francesi in Rome. I'll show you a picture of this is the chapel. So the chapel is kind of a radiating little nook off of the main kind of nave of the church. So wealthy patrons of the church would take on the decoration of a particular chapel, and it was a way to curry favor with the church and with God, conveniently. And so this particular chapel had, before the altarpiece, before the Inspiration of Matthew, Caravaggio had completed two side paintings, which you can't quite see in this image, but if you were standing where these people are and you kind of leaned in, you could look to the left and you would see a painting called The Calling of Matthew. And if you lean to the right, you would see a painting called The Martyrdom of Matthew. So there's a Matthew theme here that you can see. And the two side paintings were unveiled around 1600. And they vaulted Caravaggio into citywide and beyond renown. They were highly praised. It startled the art world in Rome. They were radically new and innovative approaches to depicting a sacred narrative. And Caravaggio received commissions from another church, Santa Maria del Popolo, and he was away kind of working on paintings for that space. But he's summoned back to San Luigi de Francesi to create the altarpiece for the Contarelli Chapel. And the instructions were to create something connected to the inspiration of Matthew. And there's a great story that goes along with this. The initial painting that Caravaggio created for the altarpiece was in fact rejected by the church for being kind of indecorous or not suitable for the gravitas that befits a saint and an apostle. So this is the painting that Caravaggio created initially. We only have it in black and white. It was destroyed in World War II, unfortunately, but we can see, we can get the gist from a black and white photograph. In this version, Matthew sits on a chair with his legs crossed, and an angel leans in over his elbow and is guiding his hand as he is writing his testament or his story. So it's receiving divine inspiration in form of an angel. And the church officials really didn't like Matthew's grubby foot, his grubby bare foot, sticking out kind of into our space. So you can see those the toes. This is Caravaggio is very masterful at something called foreshortening, which is where it kind of a part of the body sort of looks like it's coming out into our space. And it's quite difficult to do. So it's difficult. It's much easier to paint a foot if it's kind of more in profile, right? So that it's there's nothing that looks like it's protruding out towards us. And so we look at this and we understand that the toe is closer to us, the viewer, than the heel. So that's foreshortening. And but yeah, there's kind of very casual manner of sitting with his legs crossed, and you can imagine in the let's go back to the let's go back. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. I always go the wrong way. Here we go. Back to the Contarelli Chapel. If that altarpiece that was rejected, that painting, you can imagine that the worshipers or the church officials at eye level, we would have been looking at his feet, these bare feet. Not maybe the best suited painting for a very sacred space. Caravaggio always he has a very naturalistic and very realistic depiction of the human form, and you can see here with this depiction of Matthew, they're very individualistic features to his face. His forehead and kind of the weathering around his eyes and his hair. You can tell that this is a real individual, that Caravaggio probably used a specific model for this. Probably maybe not the most auspicious model. So Caravaggio had a reputation for spending time with prostitutes and street brawlers and in kind of tavern type spaces. He had a very raucous kind of nightlife. He was always getting into trouble for carrying a sword. It was illegal to carry a sword in Rome, but he said it's no problem. I'm under the protection of Cardinal Francesco Maria Del Monte. Del Monte it took Caravaggio under his wing, and he was Cardinal Del Monte was a kind of an esteemed art collector and a very wealthy person in Rome. And he had a very fancy palazzo across from San Luigi dei Francesi. And Caravaggio thought that was just grand and kind of strutted about Rome, carrying his sword. And there are arrest records that we have, or that exist, showing him getting arrested numerous times for wearing his sword and causing all kinds of mayhem and throwing things at waiters and yeah, he has quite a kind of a storied personal life. He killed somebody eventually. So I shouldn't laugh about that. That's no laughing matter. And he was exiled from Rome and spent the last few years of his life around Sicily and Malta and Naples. But anyway, we're not there yet. We're still in Rome. Where was I? How did that story come about? Oh yes, I was talking about Caravaggio would pull individuals from his nightlife essentially to be the models for these very, very saintly figures, and I think it must have caused some consternation, because you can imagine that some of them perhaps would have been recognizable. I did read at some point, again, I can't remember the source, so I hesitate to to kind of spread this story, but I remember reading somewhere about, there was a recognizable prostitute that Caravaggio used as a model for the Virgin Mary at one point. And it's like, wait a minute, like that's so-and-so. So anyway, but because of that, though, there is this sense of naturalism and individualism in the faces of these figures that makes the narrative more powerful when it's kind of not the Baroque idea is about kind of, again, bringing the religious world or clarifying the religious message and impacting the viewer in a very clear and dramatic and theatrical way, and so by rendering the figures more naturalistically, I think it heightens the impact of the narrative, because we can see they feel like real people, and it feels much more immediate. Okay, that's enough on that. Okay, and I already talked about Francesco Maria Del Monte. So like I said, he was a great patron, and he was really the force behind the commissions at San Luigi dei Francesi, so at the Contarelli Chapel. So it was really thanks to this one patron that Caravaggio's phase of creating these large religious works in Rome came about. So on the left, we have the painting that was rejected. We think that Cardinal Del Monte was the one who salvaged the situation. He probably bought the painting on the left and then paid for the new painting. So he kind of eased the tensions with the church. So here we have on the right is the final version. You can see as much. It still has the Caravaggesque elements. So the narrative has been it's still very simple and condensed. So there is only the figure of Matthew paired with an angel. There are no other kind of interior. The background is very sparse in both, but his feet are kind of tucked away. We're not looking at the sole of his foot here, and he's wearing, I think, perhaps a more ennobling robe. So let's look more closely at the painting we have. So in the upper portion of the painting, an angel is kind of descending in this cloud of kind of cloth or white linen. And you can see that he's enumerating on his fingers. I love this gesture here. Again, very, very clear. The Baroque painting, or Italian Baroque, is about clarity of narrative, no ambiguity. And so this painting is about the inspiration of Matthew, and you can see that the angel is literally enumerating what he or God wants Matthew to include in his writing. And Matthew is kind of kneeling at his desk, like kind of balancing, and you can see that he's making this twisting motion. He's turning over his shoulder, and the light is kind of flowing down from above. So you always look for the light source with Caravaggio to understand kind of the force of the narration, or where is the narrative going. So here the light is coming from above. So kind of, again, this idea of divine inspiration flowing down from heaven to fall on the face of Matthew, probably more dignified model that we have here, and a very faint halo. Notice, I'll come back to this, but just notice how the book is tipping off the edge of the table here. Just keep that in your mind. And as you can see, a very dark background. So very typical of Caravaggio to reduce the narrative to its most essential forms. We always have a very Spartan, very clean kind of interior. It's always very dark. Again, that's very typical of Caravaggio. This emphasis on chiaro, scuro, on light and dark, so that the darkness recedes into very, very dark shadow. And then there's always a strong source of light. And that's illuminating only certain parts of the figures. So look how dark the left-hand side of the face is of Matthew compared to the right. So that's an example of chiaro, scuro. And here's the lower part of the painting. His feet are they're away. They are not in our field of view, really. Or I mean, they're pointed. The soles of the feet are pointed away. Notice here the bench that he is leaning on, and this bench, one leg is tipping over the edge of whatever this is, like a floor. I'm going to pull back out, and then I think you'll see what I mean here. Okay, so the Baroque idea is about breaking down any kind of barrier between the viewer and the painting. So Baroque art wants to pull you in. So there's no separation between us and the artwork. And that's about creating the forcefulness or the immediacy, or the making sure that the narrative comes across, especially in religious paintings, religious artwork. And one device that Caravaggio deployed to break down that barrier is he would often have items in or elements of the painting that looks like they're tipping into our space. And so here we have the book dangling off the edge of the table We have the stool tipping over the edge. And it gives us this sense that we're in the same space as Matthew, that there is very little separation between us and these figures, that we're witnessing this. So Matthew isn't separate. Like if we rolled forward in time, even just a moment or two, we feel that stool or bench might tip accidentally into our space. It's a precariousness of the placement here. And we're also kind of below. It's almost like we're coming up the stairs, right? So he's very carefully crafted the viewpoint here. How you can support the lecture series is by donating at jonesgallery.ca/arthistory. You'll find other videos there about Caravaggio and the idea of the Baroque. Technical support today by Caleb Jones, and I am Sarah Jones, and thank you for watching.